call to reach the masses, men of every birth, for an answer Jesus gave the key. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Stay right there, stay right there, stay right there. Just in worship, just in worship. Lift him up. Lift him up. That's it there, that's it there. Till he speaks from eternity. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. One more time, can we say, lift him up, lift him up, lift him up. Yeah, that's it. Till he speaks from eternity. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto grateful, 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 gratefulness. Said it's flowing from here. Oh, grateful, grateful, great. I don't know about anybody else in here, but I'm grateful, 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 gratefulness. Patrick, I dare you to do it one more time. This flow said it is grateful, for grateful. Said I am grateful, 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 gratefulness flowing from his flow, flowing from my heart. No music, no music, no music, no music. Just let the saints worship. Are the issues of my heart. One more time, say, flowing from my heart. Say, flowing from my heart. Oh, are the issues of my. Can we say that one more time? Say, flowing, flowing. I've got issues, but God is able. My heart is grateful, is gratefulness. If you're grateful this morning, come on and put your hands together and let's bless God just really quickly. If you got a reason to be grateful this morning, you ought to put those hands together and bless God with your hands. Ha! Been so good to me, I can't tell it all. But I got a testimony in my hands. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. You know, every now and then God is kind to us, and there's just a sweet spirit in this house this morning. second chapter of the book of the prophet Joel. Joel, the second chapter. Joel, the second chapter. Joel, the second chapter. Now, Austin, it's not nice for you to have snacks and you don't bring no snacks with nobody else. That's all right. We're going to forgive you because that's what you do in church. You forgive people. All right. Supposedly you don't bring snacks for nobody else. You bring snacks for the pastor, man. The book of Joel, the prophet Joel. Joel, the second chapter, the 21st verse. Joel, the second chapter and the 21st verse. Joel, the second chapter and the 21st verse. The book of the Lord, the words of the prophet read upon this accord. Do not be afraid. Land of Judah, be glad and rejoice. Can I read that to you one more time? Do not be afraid, land of Judah, be glad and rejoice. I want to preach with a heavy heart from the idea I'm going to find a way to be grateful. I'm going to find a way to be grateful. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I hope that you were all assembled around the table, around folks that you love and folks that love you. This is a week that introduces us and sends us into a season where we are posited and postulate the ideas of thanksgiving, praise, and gratefulness and gratitude for the next veritably 2 months. As we celebrate and consider around the table of Thanksgiving all the things that we for. Some of y'all got folks that's still at your house and you wondering when they gonna leave. For 4 days now they done sit up in your house, ate up your food, warmed up in your heat, used up all your cable and your electricity. They've been screwed all across your floor and your sofa. And some of y'all gave up your beds to be nice to folks. All in the pursuit of finding something to be grateful for. And as we ponder what we're thankful for, there is a weightiness, a heaviness of this moment. The act of gratitude in this hour is almost Herculean. It's difficult. It's a lift. It's a burden, a labor. On one hand, we understand the importance of centering gratitude as the focal points of our lives and as a healthy spiritual practice. Gratitude is a healthy spiritual practice. On the other hand, we are in the second year of a worldwide pandemic where millions of people have died globally and hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives nationally. The act of gratitude in this hour is a Herculean effort. To that regard, there's not a single person, institution, or organization that remains unaffected or untouched by the ramifications of the last 2 years. We have all been impacted by the catastrophes of COVID. That's just one thing. But then to redouble our trauma, the cruelties of careless elected officials, folks who are talking about we can just risk our elderly and at-risk population. And then we have the cruelties that we have espoused and placed upon one another. Some folks just hard-headed, some folks willful, some folks ignorant, some folks just don't care. won't wear a mask, won't get vaccinated, won't get boosted, still want to come to everything, still want to be out everywhere, still want to be all close. We have vastly overestimated our ability to decipher and discern what 6 feet looks like. Why are you so close to me after 2 years? There is a heaviness, repercussions of all of those actions and interactions have left a spiritual and emotional weight. It's a trauma. If we are honest with ourselves and truthful with one another, there is not a single person that is not experiencing some form of trauma in this moment. Some of us have gone through COVID. Some of us had COVID. Some of us lost some folks from COVID. Can I go a little further? COVID was the story, but there was also the backdrop, the context of the story. Some of us lost some folks. It wasn't COVID related, but COVID magnified our grief and magnified our pain. The ways in which we would celebrate and remember them, we had to be distant and couldn't touch and couldn't feel and couldn't gather and couldn't remember. The last 2 years have taken a toll on us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Our emotional predilection facing the dire reality is to entrench ourselves in a place of hopelessness. Some of us have gone down into the places of emotional holes where we simply refuse to hope anymore. Because if we be real with ourselves, the place of hopelessness becomes a suit of armor. We wear our belief or disbelief in the possibility of things improving as a method and modality of protection. Hopelessness is a place where we are shielded from disappointment. We are shielded from heartbreak. We are shielded from having our expectations taken away. Rather than be hopeful and then be disappointed, we would rather be hopeless and don't go through the heartbreak of losing again. We arm ourselves with disappointment. We throw our expectations away. Life has been so hard. Things have been so traumatic. I don't even want my heart to be broken anymore. So just let me put on hopelessness. Let me, as the Bible said, Mara, let me wear my sorrow. Because you can't beat the broken. If I'm already broken, you can't break me anymore. If I'm already sad, you can't make me any sadder. If I'm already wrecked, you can't ruin me. Just let me wear my hopelessness. Let me wear my trauma. Let me wear my disappointment. 2 years of heartbreak, 2 years of loss, 2 years of darkness and despair will cause you to invest and inscribe to an ideology, psychology, and pedagogy of despair and nihilism. That's just a simply fancy word for saying I don't believe anymore. I don't hope anymore. I don't aspire anymore. 2 years of canceling plans and canceling trips, putting things on the back burner, having to hide our hearts and hopes. Trauma will make you want to give up on everything. Even now, on the cusp of a new variant, it feels like everything in our world is designed to weaponize and steal our hope and feed our despair. And when hope is stolen and despair is gluttonous, we've gotten fat on despair. Our trauma response is to simply give up and give out. I'm not really trying to give up. It's not that I don't believe that better things could come. It's not that I don't believe that God is going to turn things around. It's not that I don't believe that I can't make it through. But sometimes hope is abused, and sometimes hope is manipulated, and sometimes we say that we're blessed and highly favored, and we don't talk about the real and true conditions of our heart. We like to play pretty, as my Grammy would say, and put lipstick on a pig. Y'all know how it is. When you wake up in the morning, and you putting on a brave face for everybody else but yourself. You look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I don't know if I have anything worth pressing for. I don't know if there's anything worth coming back for. I don't know if there's anything worth moving on for. It's not that I don't think God can. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. This message this morning is for grown folks that got grown emotions and a mature spirituality that knows that every day of my life is not blessed and highly favored. Sometimes I'm stressed and depressed. In the recourse in the face of abuse is simply to turn off my hope. Trying to spare myself the emotional roller coaster that is associated with uncertainty and anxiety. So I turn off my hope. Trying to avoid having my feelings hurt because I'm a grown person, but my feelings still get hurt. So I turn off my hope. Sometimes the sun is shining, but I feel like I got a cloud over me, and I turn off my hope. Don't look at me in that tone of voice. You've also been to places in your life where you wanted to turn off the hope. Places where you've had too many missteps, too much mistrust, too many mistakes, and you want to turn off the hope. Too many broken hearts and broken promises and broken feelings. You just won't turn it off and not deal with it anymore. How many people have gone through things and simply turned the hope off? Turned off my expectations, turned off my anticipation, turned off my celebration, because if I be real with you, every time I hope, it hurts. You're not talking to me in here this morning, because the reality is when you believe in something, when you want something, when you desire something, when you aspire to something and you are defeated emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, hope can hurt. I know that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, but every now and then you got to take a moment to acknowledge that there have been times in your life where hope has hurt. Many of us in 2016 are facing the proposition of Donald John Trump as the president of the United States. We went to bed thinking it was going to go one way, but we rose the next day and understood that Hillary Clinton was not the president of the United States of America. And we discovered once again that hope can hurt. I know that God will come through, that God will make a way, that God will open up a door. But can I create space for us to expose and exercise and explore the reality that there have been times where we wanted things to work out the way we wanted them to work out, but instead of them working out the way that we wanted them to work out, hope hurt. It's a healthy spirituality that allows us to acknowledge that there have been times in our life where the divine has not done what we wanted the divine to do. Times in our life where God did not move like we wanted God to move. Times when we were blessed but we did not feel like we had any favor. Times when we felt like God left us out. And in those times, it necessitates the reality of a hard truth. And that hard truth is simply this: as much as God will bless you, God is not your puppet. God is not at our beck and call. And because God is not at our beck and call, it means that sometimes we don't always get what we want. Nor does God move how we want God to move all the time. Healthy maturity in the face of life not working how we want it to work is to cultivate a spirituality where our response to disappointment is not to throw a tantrum. Healthy spirituality when God don't do and God don't move and God don't supply like you want God to move, do, and supply is to say, God, I refuse to throw a tantrum just because I didn't get my way. healthy spirituality in the face of the reality of that sometimes God will let you down. I know that you ain't supposed to question God. They say that all the time in church, but there have been times in our lives where we have prayed for stuff and we did not get what we wanted. Times when it feels like God let us down, but healthy spirituality and mature spirituality says, God, I ain't leaving you just because I didn't get my way. Because if I got my way every time I told God or asked God to do something, that would mean I was God. Growing in God means our response to disappointment is to fathom the possibilities of moving beyond the limitations of my expectations. Let me say that one more time. Growing in God means to fathom the possibilities of moving beyond the limitations of my expectation. Can I keep it 100 with you today? Sometimes walking with God means walking away from what you expected. Because our expectations come preloaded with limitations. Every expectation that we have comes preloaded with what can be done, what can be accomplished, and what can be achieved. But God is not a God of limitation. The same God who brought you to this place in this time is the God that says, I'll do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think. But sometimes God ain't going to do it your way. God will pull us from the stagnation of low expectations so that God might be able to make God's self known. And what we wrestle with in this uncomfortable knowledge is that faith is a subversion of our expectation. Let me say that to you one more time. Faith is a subversion of our expectations. If you knew how God was going to bless you, it wouldn't be faith. If you knew how God was going to come through for you, it wouldn't be faith. If you knew how God was going to turn things around, it would not be faith. But faith is a subversion of our expectations. I know how I think it can work out, but there is a divine God that has the ability, capacity to subvert my expectations. God will move in the subversive in order to bring forth the salvific. Because our limitations are not God's limitations. And there ought to be somebody in here this morning that can say that I'm glad that what confused me don't confound God. I'm glad that what impacts me don't impair God. I'm glad that God is able to transform, transition, and restore me. I'm glad that God is able to pull hope from hopelessness. I'm glad that God is able to subvert my expectations. This subversion of the expectations is the same dynamic that we find in our biblical lesson this morning. There's a man by the name of Joel. He's a prophet to Jerusalem. He enters into a similar hopelessness in a season of famine. They were having supply chain issues in the southern kingdom. There were bare shelves and empty stock rooms in the southern kingdom. There was a supply chain issue concerning the land. Nothing was coming out of the soil. This was a season of fruitlessness. And in the season of fruitlessness, the people have become anxious. You must understand that when the product and the life of your community is in the soil, when the soil does not produce, your people are in danger. When the place that you are expecting your blessing to come from stops producing for you, you begin to be anxious and fearful and doubtful because you're wondering how God is going to make a way and how God is going to open up a door when there's nothing coming from the ground. Thank you, Holy Ghost. Has everybody ever been in a season of their life where their soil was fruitless, where you thought that there would be some blessings coming through? You thought there would be some ways made. You thought that there would be some paths, but there was a problem in the soil. The soil was fruitless. They become anxious, they become nervous because they put some seeds in the soil, but there's nothing coming up. God have mercy. Has anybody ever had a time and season in their life where you did a lot of sowing, but you did no reaping? Joel is called to minister to folks that are traumatized by fruitlessness. God help me. Sometimes going back is not a deterrent. Sometimes the lack of activity at all will make you feel some kind of way. You didn't lose any ground, but you're not making up any ground either. You're not going forward. God, it's not taking you to the next place. Sometimes you are in a place of stagnation. And in this place of stagnation, in this place of famine, the people have been discouraged, demeaned, and denigrated. And the goal of the prophet to communities that have been discouraged, demeaned, and denigrated in a time where there is no production, no forward movement, there was stagnation within their expectation, there was no fruitfulness. For all intents and purposes, there was lack. And there was lack of leadership. The time where this prophet is called, he's called in a time of famine. The Bible says that Joel was called in a catastrophe. I want you to hear me closely, because this is really the only point I won't preach this morning. Joel is called in a catastrophe. I'm going to try that one more time because ain't nobody happy yet. Joel was called in a catastrophe. He was not called in comfort. He was not called when things were calm. He was not called when things were together. He did not get the call in peacetime. Joel was called when things were falling apart. Joel was called when people were freaking out. Joel was called when people wanted to give up. Are you hearing what I'm saying this morning? Joel was called when folks were depressed and they were stressed. Joel was called when folks started believing that there was nothing that was going to happen, that no ways would be made. Joel was called when things were falling apart. God have mercy. He was not called in comfort, but Joel was called in calamity. And it leads me to believe that the calling is not designed for folks that have it all together. It leads me to believe that the calling on your life is not for folks that ain't going through nothing. It leads me to believe that the calling on your life is not meant for a world that's not in trouble. But you are called in the midst of calamity. You are called when things are falling apart. You are called in the time of trouble. It leads me to believe that God calls you in famine, not after the famine. Let me say that to you one more time. This is for somebody that's wondering why they got their ministry in the famine. God calls you in the famine, not after the famine. This is for somebody that's wondering why your job is crazy. God calls you in the famine, not after the famine. This is for somebody that's wondering why you fighting battles on every side. God calls you in the famine, not after the famine. This is for somebody that's wondering why there was almost a fist fight at my house on Thanksgiving. It's because God calls you in the famine, not after the famine. And there ought to be one somebody in the house today that can declare the reason that I'm called in this season is because called me to the famine. Yeah, I've been called to moments that are broken. I've been called to stuff that's dysfunctional. I've been called to things that are falling apart. God called me in the famine, and there ought to be at least one somebody in the house that can declare the reason that I'm here today, the reason that I have the anointing that I have, the reason that I have the gifts that I have is Because God called me in the famine. I was called in it. I'm not ducking the fight. I was called in it. I'm not running from the scrap. I was called in it. I'm not looking for an escape. I was called in it. I came real and ready because I was called in it. Don't look at me crazy. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at me that way. I was called for the fight. I was called in calamity, in catastrophe, in famine. God called me to this, and there ought to be somebody that can declare, I've been called to this. The prophet in catastrophe, calamity, and famine. Y'all watch this. He has the audacity to say, be glad and rejoice. No, now, back up. I told you he was called in the famine. There is no evidence before him that there is a reason to be glad. There's no evidence that there is a reason to rejoice. But the prophet lifts his voice and puts his credibility on the line and tells all those folks that are anxious, demeaned, depressed, and downtrodden to be glad and rejoice. Consider how audacious it is to declare, be glad and rejoice when the land is bare. What are you glad about? I can only imagine that some of them walked away from that and said, Joel, you are crazy. I'm not celebrating my sorrow. You ain't going to set me up to be glad and rejoice. My misery. I'm going through some real stuff this morning. You looking at me crazy talking about some be glad and rejoice. I know where I am. Look around, Joel. Ain't no fruit, ain't no food. This ain't fun. But you telling me to be glad and Joel, I know what words mean. How am I being glad when I'm so sad? How can I be glad when my fields are dry? When everything around them is telling them, you got no good reason to be glad. Everything around them is telling them that you have no reason to rejoice. The word that God gives Joel in the season of famine. The word that God gives Joel in a season of disappointment. The word that God gives Joel in a season when nothing is working out like we wanted it to. God tells Joel that gratitude is a spiritual practice. It involves finding a reason to be grateful. Please take care, siblings of the divine. The act of hopefulness in the midst of despair is an act of divine revelation. I know what my eyes see, but I'm trying to see through the eyes of God. I know what's before me, but I'm trying to see me like God see me. I know what I'm in, but I'm trying to look at it the way that God looks at it. Gratitude is not always what you have. Gratitude is what you find. Oh, God. Gratitude is not always what you have. Sometimes gratitude is what you find. God. There was nothing coming up in the fields. They don't see anything moving. They don't see anything growing. They don't see any fruitfulness. And so they have to dig for gratitude. They have some places where They're uncomfortable. They have to search themselves and their souls. And they have to find what they don't have. I'm trying to help you this morning. It's not in their hands, it's in their hearts. They have to dig for gratitude. Gratitude is what you find when you go down into the dark places of your heart. When you go down into the dark places of your soul, when you go down into the difficult moments and you acknowledge that I've been through some bad things and I'm not grateful for what I went through. But I am grateful that I went through it because I'm still here and I'm still alive. I've lost some things and I'm not grateful about what I lost. But I am grateful that I'm still here and I'm still alive. I've had some nasty breakups and some folks gave up on me. I'm not grateful for how they treated me. I'm not grateful for what they did to me. But I am grateful that I'm still here and I'm still alive. I want you to understand this morning, they're not going to give you the reason to be grateful. They're not going to hand it to you on a silver platter. This is the year that nothing is coming out of the ground, but you're going to have to dig for it. The spiritual work of this season is to go down into the last 2 years of your life and say, I've had some pain. There have been some tears, but I'm going to dig for my gratitude. The spiritual work of this season is to dig down into my life and find my praise. Dig down into my life and find my thankfulness. Dig down into my life and find my thanksgiving. The life-saving work of this moment is to dig down and realize that I still have a reason to be grateful. I may not have what I want, but what I want is what I need. So I'm digging for my gratitude. I may struggle for it, but I'm digging for my gratitude. I may toil, but I'm digging for my gratitude. It may not come like I want it, but I'm struggling for my gratitude. I'm going to find a way to give God praise, find a way to give God glory, find a way to lift my hands, find a way to rejoice, find a way to be glad. Things are falling apart, but I will be glad. Going through some storms, but I will be glad. Tears are falling from my eyes, but I will be glad. I'm climbing some mountains, but I will be glad. Facing some obstacles, but I will be glad. There are some valleys and there are some storms, but I will be glad. There ought to be somebody that can turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I'll find a way. Find a way to praise God. Find a way to lift my head. Find a way to move forward. I'll find a way to worship. I'll find a way to give God glory. Find a way to make it through. Good morning, Cow Temple. I hope the Lord bless you real good. But this is for everybody this morning that's had some catastrophes. But I'm still finding a way. Facing some darkness, but I'm still finding a way. They disenfranchised our vote, but we still found a way. Messing with our housing, but we still found a way. playing with our money, but we still found a way, messing with our feelings, but we still found a way. You ought to be able to tell somebody, find a way to praise God. I'll find a way to worship God. I'll find a way to give God glory. I'll find a way to give God praise. I'll dig for it. Is there anybody that can declare, I'm digging for it? You see me cry, but I'm digging for it. You see me toiling, but I'm digging for it. You see me rocking, but I'm digging for it. You see my hands, I'm digging for it. You see my heart, I'm digging for it. There ought to be one somebody that can declare, dig. Ain't gonna give it to you. Dig. They ain't gonna offer it to you, but dig. 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 If nobody hands it to you, dig for it. My mama gave me some flowers 3 years ago when she came here. Just some bulbs. And I said, Mama, now you know I'm about to kill this. I'm going to kill it. She said, well, try. Put it in the ground. Try. Let's see what happens if you try it. Now, you must understand one thing about Jane in Missouri. She is infinitely hopeful and believes in us, even though evidence suggests that maybe she shouldn't. She gave me the bulbs, and I said, well, I want to prove her wrong and let her know I'm grown, and I know my limitations. Put the bulbs in the ground, and nothing happened. I said, I got her. I called her not on the landline. I called her on FaceTime because I wanted her to see. I got you. I said, Mama, here's the pot. I put the bulbs in. Look at it. Ain't nothing but some dirt. She said, okay. Give it some time. Gave it some time. 3 months later, I started seeing some activity. I said, Lord, something is starting to come up. She called me on FaceTime. A few months later, she said, show me your pot. Mama, my camera ain't working right now. She said, you got 2 cell phones. Go on the other one. Pull it up. She says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. The reason why you are digging for gratitude in this moment is because there are some things that are not seen. I dare you to dig for it. Dig for it. Dig for it. Dig for it. Grace, mercy, and peace be unto you.